Hi, and welcome to this video in which we're going to look at the question of how much money God wants from me. I had to learn the answer to this question the hard way. I became a Christian as a college student, and then I graduated from seminary. And so when I graduated from seminary and was ready to go out into the ministry, I hadn't been a Christian for more than a few years. And there were things that I didn't know, and there's some things that I knew that I hadn't come to grips with. And I got my dream job after I graduated from seminary of teaching in a Christian college. And Christian colleges are sometimes notorious for how little they pay their faculty members. And I only made $8,000 a year. And $8,000 bought more then than it does now, but it didn't buy very much even then. And we were just squeaking by, just barely able to put a roof over our heads and clothes on our backs and food in our stomach. And when I realized how close we were to just being able to survive, I thought, well, when you give money to other people who are in ministry who need it. And I thought, well, I'm in ministry and I need it. So I'll cut out that middle step and I'll just give to myself, which is the same as keeping it. And I didn't live with that very long before the Lord began really hammering me and teaching me that that wasn't the issue. What he began to teach me is that God doesn't want our money. He wants our hearts. And the test of whether or not he has our heart is if we give him our money. It was a rude awakening. And even though we didn't make very much money at all, the Lord persuaded me that it was my job to demonstrate to him that he had my heart by giving my money, and that I would trust him to care for my needs. A valuable and important lesson. King Solomon, the wisest man who ever lived, wrote, "Do not weary yourself to gain wealth. Cease from your consideration of it. For when you set eyes on it, it is gone. For wealth certainly makes itself wings like an eagle that flies toward the heavens." That's in Proverbs 23, verses 4 and 5. And later he wrote, "He who loves money will not be satisfied with money, nor he who loves abundance with its income." That was in Ecclesiastes chapter 5, verse 10. Money can be a wonderful servant, but it's always a dreadful master. The reason is that God created money to be an instrument. He never intended it to be an end in itself. Jesus himself said, "No servant can serve two masters, for either he will hate the one and love the other, or else he will be devoted to one and despise the other. You cannot serve both God and wealth." Luke 16:13. Now we want to look at 4 principles that help us understand how God views money, and these 4 principles then can guide us in becoming conduits for God's money. The first is the stewardship principle. The stewardship principle is that everything we have, God owns. We are merely his assets manager. Then second, we want to look at the treasure principle. We can't take it with us, but we can send it ahead. Third, we want to look at the giving principle. The only thing we keep for eternity is what we give away on earth. And finally, the source principle. God wants us to view him as the source of all our money and to give accordingly. So let's unpack those 4. First, the stewardship principle states that God owns everything we have. We are merely his assets manager. In Matthew 25, Jesus teaches that when he gives us resources, we're to invest them in ways that produce a return on what he has given us. In Luke 12, he teaches that we're to lay up treasures in heaven, not on earth, because where our treasure is, there will our heart be. We're held accountable for how we manage the things that God gives us. Paul speaks to our stewardship responsibilities in 1 Corinthians chapter 4, and he says, "It's required of stewards that one be found trustworthy." So, as stewards of the resources that God gives us, One of the things God asks us to do is to give back to him a portion of what he has already given to us. Now, why would God do that? The answer is, as we saw earlier, that he doesn't need our money, but he wants our hearts. And the primary way he has of testing our hearts is to ask for our money. Haggai 2:8 says, "Silver is mine, and the gold is mine." Deuteronomy 8:18 reminds us, "Remember the Lord your God, for it is he who gives you the ability to produce wealth." Giving generously keeps our heads clear and our hearts warm. Number 2, the treasure principle states that we cannot take it with us, but that we can send it ahead. One of the primary ways we do things with God is to send our money ahead, investing it in eternal things. And in his valuable book, The Treasure Principle, Randy Alcorn tells a story that makes a powerful point on the wisdom of sending money ahead. Let me read to you from that book. He says, imagine you're alive near the end of the Civil War. You're living in the South, but you're a Northerner. You plan to move home as soon as the war is over. While in the South, you've accumulated great wealth in Confederate currency. Now suppose you know for a fact that the North is going to win the war and the end is imminent. What would you do with your Confederate money? If you're wise, there's only one answer. Immediately cash in your Confederate currency for U.S. currency, the only money that will be worth anything after the war is over. You keep only enough Confederate currency to meet your short-term needs. As a Christian, you have inside knowledge of an eventual transition in your life. Either Jesus is going to come again in your lifetime, or you're going to die. This is the ultimate insider's tip. Earth's currency will become worthless when Christ returns or when you die. So, the wise thing to do is to keep only what you need of Earth's currency and send the rest ahead. There's nothing wrong with Confederate currency as long as you understand its limits. Realizing its value as temporary should radically affect your use of it. To accumulate vast earthly treasures that you can't possibly hold on to for long is like stockpiling Confederate currency, even though you know it's about to become worthless. It doesn't make any sense. Well, Jesus said in Matthew 6:19-21, "Do not store up for yourselves treasures on earth, where moth and rust destroy, and where thieves break in and steal. But store up for yourselves treasures in heaven, where neither moth nor rust destroys, and where thieves do not break in or steal. For where your treasure is, there your heart will be also." Number 3, the giving principle states that you only keep what you give away. When we set our mind to give rather than accumulate, many good things happen. The joy that comes from a life of giving is greater than the frustration of trying to get what we want from life. As usual, everything is backwards. We think that getting what we want would give us happiness, while giving what we have would give us unhappiness. But the opposite is true. Again, Randy Alcorn writes, "The act of giving is a vivid reminder that it's all about God, not about us. It's saying, I'm not the point. He's the point. He does not exist for me. I exist for him. God's money has a higher purpose than my affluence." Giving is a joyful surrender to a greater person and a greater agenda. Giving affirms Christ's lordship. It dethrones me and exalts him. It breaks the chains of materialism that enslave me. As long as I still have something, I believe I still own it. But when I give it away, I relinquish the control, power, and prestige that come with wealth. At the moment of release, the light turns on. The magic spell is broken. My mind clears and I recognize God as owner, myself as servant, and other people as intended beneficiaries of what God has entrusted to me. Giving breaks the bondage of materialism. Giving defeats the spirit of entitlement that characterizes so many Americans. Giving releases us from the gravitational hold of money and possessions. Giving shifts us to a new center of gravity, heaven, and pulls us in that direction. Fourth, the source principle states that God wants us to view Him as the source of all of our money and to give accordingly. Christians, like non-Christians, tend to see their money as a reservoir out of which they draw to meet their needs. So if a ministry need arises, they look at the reservoir and they decide if they have enough money to meet the needs. If they believe they do, they may give to the ministry. If they believe they do not, they may not give to the ministry. This, of course, is a safe way to live on the surface. And Christians can do a good deal of good this way if they manage their money carefully and are unselfish. But there are times when God may call us to launch out in faith and give above and beyond our means. In 2 Corinthians 8, the Macedonian Christians had experienced great suffering, with some of them apparently even being killed. In the throes of this great suffering, they were also locked in deep poverty. Yet they begged the Apostle Paul for the privilege of participating in the financial support of others in need, and they gave generously. Paul writes that according to their ability and beyond their ability, they gave of their own accord. 2 Corinthians chapter 8, verse 3. They gave beyond their ability, something which Paul attributes to a work of grace that God had done in their lives. If we see ourselves as conduits of God's reservoir of resources, we'll be less inclined to hoard our resources and more inclined to pass them on, believing that God will take care of us as we do. The principle from this passage is that if we view ourselves as conduits for His resources, He may funnel through us money that He wants to go to others' needs, and in doing so, He meets the needs of others through us. And He meets our needs as well. Our faith is stretched, and our joy is increased as God commits Himself to making up the difference in what we gave that we couldn't really afford. Now finally, Randy Alcorn has another clever illustration that he presents in his book, The Treasure Principle. He says, "Where we choose to store our treasures depends largely on where we think our home is. Suppose your home is in France, and you're living in America for 3 months, living in a hotel. You're told that you can't bring anything back to France on your flight home, but you can earn money and mail deposits to your bank in France. Would you fill your hotel room with expensive furniture and wall hangings that you couldn't take back to France with you when you had to leave? Of course not. You'd send your money where your home is. You'd spend only what you needed on the temporary residence, sending your treasures ahead so they'd be waiting for you when you get home. That's what we do when we choose to be conduits for God's resources. God can flow His money through us, giving us eternal reward for a resource that we would have lost if we'd have tried to keep it. Mark Twain was attending a meeting where a missionary had been invited to speak, and Twain was deeply impressed as the missionary began to speak, and later he wrote about it, and he said, "The preacher's voice was beautiful. He told us about the sufferings of the natives, and he pleaded for help with such moving simplicity that I mentally doubled the 50 cents I had intended to put in the plate. He described the pitiful misery of those savages so vividly that the dollar I had in mind gradually rose to 5. Then that preacher continued, and I felt that all the cash I carried on me would be insufficient, and I decided to write a large check. And then he went on, and I abandoned the idea of the check. And he went on, and I got back to $5. And he went on, and I got back to 4, 2, and 1. And still he went on. And when the plate came around, I took 10 cents out of it. Well, that is not the perspective that we're to have on our money. We're to view it as God's, and to be willing to give our finances to help advance the spread of the gospel, regardless of how long a preacher preaches. Luke 12 teaches that we're to lay up treasures in heaven, not on earth, because where our treasure is, there will our hearts be also. one of the things God asks us to do is to give back to him a portion of what he has given us. And you say, well, why would he do that? The answer is that, as we've seen, he doesn't need our money. He wants our hearts, and the primary way he has of testing our hearts is to ask us for money. An encouraging thing to understand is that if we've been slow in learning this, we can change our legacy. In 1888, Alfred Nobel, a Swedish chemist, was living in grand style off the fortune he made from inventing dynamite. And when his brother died, a newspaper misunderstood and thought it was he who had died, and wrote an article entitled, "Merchant of Death is Dead." Grieved that this would be his life legacy, when he did pass away, he left $9 million to fund what has become as the Nobel Prizes. Now, few people know who invented dynamite and caused such destruction in the world, but the whole world is aware of the Nobel Prizes. Alfred Nobel altered his legacy by investing his wealth in something of lasting value. We have the chance to do the same. Our obituary in heaven can be altered, no matter how old we are, by investing our wealth, no matter how meager it might be, in eternal things. We can become a divine conduit for God's resources to flow through us. Now, I'm ending the remaining videos in this series with this announcement. If you've followed my writings for a while, you've likely heard me say this more than once, that every moment of every day, something in our soul is being fed and something is being starved. Because we live in a media-dominated world, and because much of what comes through that media is an assault on biblical values, then, in the course of living everyday life, the soul of the Christian is power-fed the things of the world, while the things of the Spirit are starved. As a result, without even realizing it, Christians are being swept out to sea by the riptide of modern culture. Statistics present a bleak picture of young people brought up in a Christian environment who are increasingly defecting from the faith as they become adults. And even those who don't actually defect are becoming more and more ambivalent about biblical beliefs and behavior. Clearly, our traditional discipleship model, which is over 50 years old, is no longer working in our radically altered and increasingly spiritually hostile cultural context. We have to devise a way to feed the soul the things of the Spirit sufficiently to offset the things of the world. Our great challenge is to reimagine a new discipleship model that is able to give Christian young people the guidance and power they need to keep from being captured by modern culture. I've been deeply burdened by this historic challenge for several years, and even my beginning of this YouTube series was motivated by a desire to light a small candle to that end. Having said that, in the providence of God, He's been cracking open a door for me in the last 6 months to begin working on this goal full-time. It's a massive project, so all-consuming that I will no longer be able to continue building this YouTube channel. And in light of that, when this Growing in Your Faith series is complete, I will not begin a new video series, though the channel will remain functioning. While I've been working for many years toward developing this discipleship model, the research and development is so massive and so demanding that nothing will be made public about it for many months. But as the creation of the needed resources begins to progress, I'll give updates to my mailing list and my YouTube channel to keep everybody appraised of the progress. The videos here are a small part of an overall spiritual master plan, so I encourage you to continue to view and listen to them from time to time. If you listen to them repeatedly as you drive or exercise or wash dishes, the truth in them will sink deeper and deeper into your soul and change you more completely than if you just listened to them once. In addition, I encourage you to continue to share them with others that you think might benefit from them. And also, if you're so inclined, I'd be grateful for your prayers for the Discipleship Project. And remain subscribed so that you'll receive notifications of updates as they occur, including the remaining videos to finish our Growing in Your Faith series. I pray for the Lord's ongoing blessing in your life as you continue growing in your faith and I look forward to seeing you next time.